So today we're going to be looking at Alfred Schnittke's third string quartet. And this piece was written in the 1980s, I believe. This date here is actually Schnittke's birth year. Um, a little bit about Alfred Schnittke as a composer. So, he was a Russian composer whose life sort of spanned 1935 or 1934 to like 90 something. He died very soon after or around the time that the Berlin Wall fell. So nearly all of his life was in the Soviet Union, but he was a young adult when Stalin died. So he was composing a lot of music, and the peak of his career really was during a time in the Soviet Union called Khrushchev's thaw. This was a period where a lot of censorship laws were being repealed, and artists were able to engage with a lot more different styles of music. That being said, he made most of his money off of film music. He taught at the Moscow Conservatory for a while, but then wrote a lot of music for films, which under the Soviet Union was sort of almost a government job. And on top of all of those film scores, he composed concert pieces, which towards the end of his life became very popular in the West. One thing that you have to talk about with Schnittke's music is his concept of polystylism. And the first piece of his to use this self-coined aesthetic was his first symphony, which was written in 1972. Basically, Schnittke's idea with polystylism was to juxtapose and combine every style of music he had access to. So not just the more conservative, like Shostakovich, like classical music, which he grew up with, but also the film music he composed, and also the serial music he had learned from Luigi Nono, and the aleatoric music, basically anything that was going on in contemporary music that he could get his hands on. He tried to infuse that into his style. And the first page of this string quartet actually quotes a number of works from across music history, and he has them labeled here. I'll zoom in. It starts with some Orlando di Lasso, so Renaissance music. Then a quotation from one of Beethoven's late string quartets, and then the Shostakovich DSCH motive, but sort of turned into a chord. And as you can imagine, these three ideas play a very significant role in the third quartet. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but all of his quartets I really liked when I was a undergraduate student, and I got to know all four of them very well at that time. I would listen to it all the time. And the first quartet is very different from the other three because it was written before his polystylistic writing. The first string quartet is just a straight 12-tone piece. So yeah, I'm excited to revisit these, and I'll let you know what I think on this listen. I only have the scores for the third and second string quartet, so those are the ones we'll be talking about. Okay, yeah, so I think this piece is a great example of polystylism in Schnittke's music, and he doesn't always have strict quotation in his pieces, but this is a good example of one that does like literally quote pieces and then take those quotations and transform them into something more narrative. I listened to this Kronos Quartet recording, and I could have mentioned the exact year of composition. It was written in 1983. I think soon after he wrote this, Schnittke suffered his first stroke, and if my memory recalls, he was like in a coma, then back composing for a few years, and then another stroke was what ended up killing him. So a very short but productive life. I didn't realize that there's a theme that's introduced at the beginning of the second movement, which becomes more important later in the piece too. Yeah, the form of it was really interesting. It felt like the second and third movements were trying to be a rondo or some sort of binary form, but there were these sections where the quote would come back, particularly the Beethoven quote, and it would sort of just derail the whole musical happening that was going on. So I found that the Orlando Di Lasso quote was used very sparingly, just as a little like cadence to sort of. There aren't any proper like releases of tension in this, which I think is what part of why it works so well. But those little cadences, Renaissance cadences, are just like a moment of repose that just have a very weird non-cadential function, even though they are cadences. And the Beethoven quote is from his Grosse Fuge, and in its original context, it's this moment of tension that always ends in this like major release, and you never get that release in this. And I think yeah, I mean that's one of the things I really liked about it, is he never went full cheese, and just reminding you of that piece by Beethoven is enough to play with your expectations. And the string writing is super fun. You got quadruple stops, lots of double stops, pizzicato stuff mixed with other textures, and tremolo stuff. Lots of very idiomatic string writing that you can sink your teeth into, and that sort of portrays the ensemble as like almost hyper string like. All these idioms of string music are kind of like overutilized, and it's all very over the top. And I think that's what I liked about Schnittke's music when I was younger. That was sort of the appeal, was how like sort of angsty and over the top and dramatic everything was. So yeah, if that's your thing, I encourage you to have a listen if you didn't listen at the appropriate time here. And tomorrow we'll look at his second string quartet, which I listened to a lot more than his other ones. I think that I found that one much more accessible. This one's pretty good too, but it's a little bit more mature, let's say, and through composed. So it takes a few more listens to get used to the third one, I think. But it's remarkable what he's able to do in 19 minutes. I never felt like there was a moment of release. It was just tension the whole time. And at the same time, there was this narrative to follow, which was very cinematic and fun. So I think there's a reason why these things get performed. And yeah, that's our introduction to Alfred Schnittke's music for this series, at least.